Okay, so, okay, you made me cry, so that's not good because, you know, the makeup. Also, can you see me because I'm a chaparra? So, hope you guys can see me. I didn't know I might need a little box to stand on. I know everybody, you know, when they meet me, they're just like, oh my God, it's so nice to meet you. But I can see in their eyes like, oh shoot, she's really short. So I try to make up for it and make a joke. But, you know, gosh, you guys, damn. Like, what? You know, like I do these kinds of, you know, speeches often. But this, as usual, for all things tied to women and New Mexico, y'all are killing it. The vibe in the room is absolutely extraordinary. I have to say, okay, I did have a Diet Coke like an hour and a half ago, so I don't do that very often, and the altitude has me a little, yeah. But yeah, there is power and vibe and love and heart in this room, and I do hope that you see it and that you know, because I get to see it from here, which is kind of fabulous. But this is you. This is, in fact, you. Nobody else. This is you. So, first of all, thank you so much to NewMexicoWomen.Org for inviting me and for getting me out here. This is so wonderful. I have felt so loved. Yeah, I cry a lot, but, you know, we did a whole Latino USA about crying, so if you want to hear me cry, you can listen to that episode. But I have felt so loved and so taken care of. I mean, like the day I arrived, I didn't have the proper coat. And so Feliz took the coat off of her back and said, here. And I thank you, Feliz. It really kept me warm. It was a hard thing to give back to you. But that's the kind of love that I have felt. And that warmth is something that is intangible. It's hard to put it into words, but I have felt it. And earlier today, I was asked, so why are you here? And I was like, that's a good question. But you shouldn't be asking me. You should ask the people who invited me. And so I said, well, you know, it is an interesting thing that myself, Mexicana, born in El DF, raised on the south side of Chicago, been in New York City and Harlem for, 35 years, that you would ask me to be here. And so in a lot of ways, as I've thought about this, because I've been pondering it, why did you ask me? Like, I don't live here. I have been here multiple times. I've reported here. And I think, in a way, it was my understanding of what you guys were saying, Patricia, wherever you are, that, it was from afar. It was kind of amor de lejos, que no es de pendejos. In this context, it was a love from afar. What you didn't know is that I have loved you from afar. The women of New Mexico. Yeah. And so this is an opportunity for me to kind of be like, okay, so let me tell some stories about my experience, right? So when I was 26 years old, I learned how to drive. I had actually been working at NPR in Washington. I was the first Latina hired at NPR in Washington in 1985. That was so... Yeah, it was not like that necessarily. It was more like, what am I doing here? And I don't get any of the jokes, and I've got to learn my own power. Although there was a lot of love, Osad. They did try to show me love. Anyway, the point is that I got a job offer in San Diego to produce public radio in Spanish, and so I learned how to drive, and 2 months later I was crossing the United States in a small white Honda Civic, that one, with a little hatchback. And I was driving across the country with my best friend, David Hershey Webb, from college. And so the truth is that, when you're traveling across the country, the scenery from D.C. basically to the border of New Mexico was, sorry, pero. And then we crossed into New Mexico. And the sun was, and it was my first time in New Mexico, and the sun was setting behind us. And I just freaked out. I had never seen anything like these colors. And so we pulled off onto the side of the road, which is kind of crazy because, I think, you Mexicans were probably like, what are you doing? You're pulling off on the side of the road. So a big truck pulled off in front of us. And I actually started freaking out. I was like, oh my God, somebody's gonna attack us. They're gonna kidnap us, and and something's gonna happen, and we're. And then like a guy gets out and he's walking to us, and I'm like to David, oh shit, what's gonna happen? And I was like, remain calm, and and the guy just said, are you guys okay? It's like, what do you mean? You said, I don't know. I stopped. I saw you earlier in the gas station, and I saw that you pulled over, and I wanted to make sure that you guys are okay. And I was like, yeah, we stopped to look at the sunset. And he was like, okay. It was like this beautiful welcoming, right, of a place that I was not sure of, and yet there was this moment, right? And, okay, truth be told, New Mexico was the first time in my life at 26 that I had ever camped because, I'm a Mexican who doesn't camp. But but I did camp here. And then, many years later, the birth of my son was announced here by a Chicana indígena in a sweat lodge in a working class barrio in her backyard in Albuquerque. And on this trip, I've had this really extraordinary experience of reporting the story that you all have been living for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So Latino USA is going to take a peek into this centuries-long story of New Mexican identity and power shifts and truth and reconciliation and history and narratives, true and false, and the beauty and the chaos that we are all made from and that you all symbolize for so many of us. You are so important to the rest of us in this country. So some takeaways. The Pueblo women, the indigenous women, in my view, are indigenous peoples. The first peoples are the founding fathers and mothers of this nation. And in here, the Pueblo women have survived. Yes, they were part of that Pueblo uprising, which I have now come to understand was the first indigenous revolution and uprising in the Americas. And it happened here, and I didn't learn that in my history books. The Pueblo women stayed. And the Hispanas came and stayed and have survived. And the Latinas and the Chicanas and the Mexicanas have stayed. And the Anglo women, the settlers and the hippies, have stayed. And the new immigrants from everywhere are coming here and staying, like the Pueblo people have taught us to stay. And so I understand all of these, or I'm trying to understand all of these complicated labels that you all kind of live with. But from a distance, when I stand back and I'm thinking of the deep story of New Mexican women, they are, to me, phenomenal, strong, hardy, truthful, spiritual, searching, questioning, moon children of the mountains, poets, writers, activists, curators, painters, silver makers, beaters, vaqueras, trabajadoras, ancestrales, fuertes, bellas, indígenas, mexicanas, chicanas, kick-ass, rugged, gorgeous, earthly, voluptuous, grounded women, chingonas, whose colors span it all, because I have seen it while I have been here in your state just for 3 days. See, the thing about New Mexican women that I understood, maybe from that beginning of when that woman in the backyard of her small house in some barrio in Albuquerque had built a sweat, is that, in fact, you do not take things passively. You do not take things sitting down, which is not to say, by the way, because I have also understood that the Pueblo people are a patient and tolerant people. And so maybe, even though you don't take things sitting down, and maybe there is not necessarily an outward aggressiveness, but there is, in fact, a constant negotiation around power, and the negotiation of how we of different ilk can, in fact, find a way to live together, because you have been doing it. You have, in fact, been living together and making a way together. And that, as you know, has made all of you stronger in very particular ways. That has forced you, New Mexican women, to create NewMexicoWomen.Org. It is the alchemy of creating something from nothing, something that we create because of people power or women power. You have been models, at least to me, which is why when you're talking about me being a model for you, I'm like, no, you have been models for me about how we can work across borders and boundaries and fault lines, because this is a rough land. This is rough terrain. So you have to be tough to stay. And you are. And you do. And then you go and create and hold meetings and find resolution and think about healing and go to that place of listening to each other. And so as I thought about that makeshift sweat lodge in the back of that house, it was, in fact, a place where I made a connection to another world of healing, of testing actually my own power, my own possibilities. So it's no surprise that many years later, as a journalist, I would end up, in fact, reporting a story in Albuquerque about how women curanderas, sobadoras, acupuncturists, spirit guides, and santeras are actually working together to get your people, our people, off of heroin because, as they say, la cultura cura. And we are deeply sad. We are a deeply sad people, so we understand. But the fact that you created a notion of la cultura cura. So much praise to you, women of New Mexico. I am honored to be in the presence of so many of you. I know that you know y'all are tough, hence the 5 poets. Whew. But you are even stronger than you think. And for years, you have been my example. So thank you in this moment. Thank you for letting me thank you publicly. So, no. So just a little brief history, because I'm sure some of you don't know. So I was born in Mexico City. My dad was from Tampico. And my dad gets a job offer. He was a medical doctor. He was a geek. A scientific nerd from El Rancho, and he becomes a medical doctor dedicated to research in the inner ear. And we all come to Chicago in the early 1960s, and my earliest arrival story is one that I actually had to learn when I was writing my second book that my amazing agent, Susan Bergholtz, who happens to be right here, helped to make happen. And I had to do my own research as to my own story. And so I was asking my mom about our arrival story, and I'll tell it very briefly, but it's a fun one. So, we came from Mexico by plane. My dad was in Chicago, had already become a U.S. citizen, and Mom and the 4 kids, we had green cards. And, my mom was traveling with 4 kids under the age of 7 on a plane, and none of us had been on a plane before, so, props to her already, because we were all like, "Wah!" And when we got to the Dallas airport immigration checkpoint, there was a very tall Texan immigration officer, and excuse me if any of you are from Texas, because I'm going to do an accent. And so the Texan agent just says, "Well, ma'am, I see here that your papers are in order. I see that we have 5 green cards. Yes, Miss Hinojosa, it looks like your paperwork is in order, but I do see that this young baby, the toddler, that would be me, well, now, she's going to have to stay here in Dallas in the airport in quarantine. She's got a little bit of a rash, and we're not so sure what she has, but the rest of you can go on up to Chicago." And my mom, who is, like me, chaparrita, 5 foot, wearing kitten heels, but, somehow, like that inner voice, right? That inner voice that we all have that makes us do what we do. That's alchemy, right? That inner voice just came up from my mom, and I know she didn't grab him because she knew that would not be a smart thing to do. But with her voice, she kind of grabbed him and she said, "Sir, my name is Berta Hinojosa, and my husband is Dr. Raul Hinojosa, and he was invited to come to the University of Chicago by the president of the University of Chicago. So, if you are not going to let me in, we are going to have to call the president of the University of Chicago, because you have to understand that we are all coming in. All 4 of us, 5 of us, my 4 children and me, we are coming in. Do you understand, sir?" And he said, "Yes, I do, ma'am. Come on in." That love, that mom voice that my mom taught me, right, where she learned how to become a feminist on the south side of Chicago by radical Jewish feminists studying at the University of Chicago, who thought my mom was crazy because she changed the sheets every day and washed my sister's white shoelaces every night. They thought she was neurotic. We grew up in the 60s and 70s. Martin Luther King was my first hero, but George Wallace, who was running for president at the time, made me, as a Mexican kid, try and think about what closet or basement I was going to have to hide in if he was elected, which is sadly the same feeling that we have children who look like me, who are looking for a place to hide in the year 2018. So my family, we consumed the media all the time, but we were invisible. And to speed up the story, I did think at one moment that I was going to want to be an actress, but I lost my heart when somebody said he didn't see how I could fit into the world of acting. And, that was a loss, but what it did was it turned me on to radio. And so I was the first Latina hired at NPR, at PBS, at CNN. And then 8 years ago, I 8 years ago, I went out on a limb and I created my own nonprofit media group, my own nonprofit organization called Futuro Media Group. I hope you come and visit on 125th Street in the heart of Harlem, where Latino USA is produced, in an African-American community where we are present and collaborating, working together. So yes, come, and if you have kids and want to do internships, get in touch. As long as you have a place to live in New York, because I can't. And the idea, it's New York. The idea around Futuro Media was to own my perspective as an American journalist and to understand that our story and our perspective mattered, and that I wanted to build my own team of journalists that was eminently diverse, where diversity in the newsroom was not something we it would be nice. No, it was the core of who we are, and how these young journalists would understand how to use their voice to tell these stories that resonate with you. So also what happens when you become your own boss is that you can make decisions. So there are a couple of words that we don't use in my newsroom. We don't use the term minority. You'll never hear that word coming out of my mouth or any of the reporters who work with me, because I'm not a minority. And you'll never hear me use the term illegal to refer to a human being. And it did go viral. Illegal is not a noun. When I challenged Steve Cortez, who works with the Trump administration, and by the way, who is somebody who I engage with. He comes to my classes in Chicago and we talk, because that's my job as a journalist, is actually to understand us all in all of our complexity and our political complexity. But just so you're clear, I didn't learn to not use the term illegal from. There really weren't any radical Latina studies professors back when I was in college that much. So I didn't learn it from them. I learned it from Elie Wiesel, who survived the Holocaust, who could not be more different than me. And he was the one who said it was the first thing the Nazis did was to declare us an illegal people. And it was the first step in dehumanizing. Very prescient for the moment that we are living in today. So as it turns out, I now am I am the only Latina that is running a nonprofit media company dedicated to English language journalism in the United States. I didn't know that when I formed the company. And to be honest with you, like you're celebrating your 5th anniversary, and I know you guys are so happy, and this is such an amazing turnout, but it's really scary. It's scary a lot of the time. I know that the women behind NewMexicoWomen.Org have been scared a lot of the time because it's scary. We know what we're doing, but we don't. True, right? There's an alchemy there, right? But interestingly, it was in fact an Anglo woman who looked at me when I was forming my company. And she was the one who was able to see me from a distance and say, you need to own your own power. You need to own your own leadership. And so, yes, there is a partnership in fact, giving power to those around you and saying it and actually saying it. Because that moment was a moment I needed to hear that from her. And it made me understand why I had to continue in launching this company. And it helped me to understand, yet again, my definition of feminism, which is, pretty basic, which is that a woman, that a person, often a woman, who helps another woman to see and use her own power. To me, that is what feminism is. So every single one of you obviously knows that you have the power to change someone's life and that you do, in fact, have that power to encourage another woman when you acknowledge their voice and their power. So you already know this, that each and every one of you, the women in this room and the men too, you are already leaders. And by the way, for me, that leadership, I'm always very worried when there is, because in our country there is so much of like, oh, you're going to make it and you're going to be a success. And then, and I'm so committed to making sure that people understand that it isn't nirvana, that because you have lots of awards, that it doesn't mean that that life is always great. So in this process, there are high days and there are low days. And so I talk about that in social media, but as a way of saying, look, if you think I'm a success, you need to understand that I'm deeply on the journey of self-love and self-healing, because we need it today. I mean, we need it, which is why, again, the women of New Mexico teach us to remain tied to our ancestral roots, to rely on that, to learn from that, because we need it now more than ever. And this notion of self-love, which our ancestors had to have, or else they would not have been able to survive. So what self-love looks like for me these days is 515 days straight of meditation that I was challenged to do by a Mexican journalist, Lidia Cacho, who has a journalist who has broken all kinds of stories and suffered kidnapping and sexual assault by Mexicans in her country because of her reporting. And I asked her how she did it, and she said, I meditate. And I was like, yeah, ay, Dios mío, everybody tells me I need to meditate. Come on, come meditate. Dale con el meditation. Oh. She was like, you need to meditate. I was like, She was like, do you have a phone? I was like, yeah. She was like, do you know how to use apps? I was like, yeah. She said, do you know how to search for apps? I was like, yeah. She says, search for meditation apps. And that's what I did. And it is something that I'm so sad that I had to wait so long to find it. But it has, in fact, saved my life. Connecting to nature, the thing that our ancestors knew was their lifeblood. That nature heals us because it is there, it is present. And I turn to nature. And actually, as a professor, when I'm in Chicago, I force my students to go and connect with nature so that they can understand that even in Chicago, it is there, and we need it, right? And I exercise like crazy. I think boxing came up in the poems. Am I right? Yeah. So I'm chingazos, right? Chingadazos. So I do that 3 times a week at 6:30 in the morning. I'm boxing because I love it, and I never want to hit anybody. My trainer's always like, imagine your opponent. I'm like, dude, there's like no opponent ever. He's like, and then he starts hitting me, and I'm like, oi! So I don't do it for getting hit or because I want to hit somebody, but because it allows us to see the actual power that we have. And that's something that is so associated with men actually can be ours, right? And not to hurt, but actually to love ourselves. And the other thing that I do is that, of course, I talk with people. I talk with everyone. And I talk about the things that sometimes people silence. So I'm very focused on the state of mental health of our Latina and brown teenagers and black teenagers because they need us. In particular, Latina teenagers have the highest rate of attempted suicide, and we have had for decades. We attempt, we don't complete. So it is our asking to see that we are in a crisis. And why wouldn't our Latina teenagers be feeling an element of self-hate? I mean, seriously? Like, all we need to do is just listen to the headlines on a daily. So, of course, we're internalizing shame and our own oppression. Oh, I get so sad. But I get happy real fast because I don't want to cry. Because then, people are always asking me, like, where's the next leader? Or who's the next Latino leader? And I'm like, they're out there. They're everywhere. But we don't know when the next one is going to. But hello, Emma Gonzalez. Hello, Emma Gonzalez. Who we all know right now because she's leading the protests in Florida on a national level. And she is saying, this is what a Latina looks like. It's not your image. And all of us are having to look at her and say, damn, girl, you're teaching us so much. But she is just one of many. And so I want to share just a couple of brief little stories before we wrap and I make my way to Albuquerque to fly to Chicago to teach on Thursday and then fly to Omaha and then fly. Yeah, it's like that. So last fall I was in southern Utah, Southern Utah University. And it was a really welcoming community and experience in Utah. And the person who picked me up said, would you like to eat something? She wanted to take me to a fancy Italian something. And then I saw on the second floor Guatemalan and Latino food. I was like, I want to go there. And then when I got to my bed and breakfast and I opened the door, and in front of me there was a construction site for dorms for the university. And all I could hear was men speaking in Spanish on the construction site. And so I was having an experience of Southern Utah like, do you see who you really are? Do you see who you really are? And then they had me meet with students, and one student whose parents are undocumented, and she is not, when she wanted to hold an event on the Southern Utah campus in support of Dreamers in DACA. And she said to me, I was really scared because I had never organized anything before. And who was I? Like, what did I think? Who did I think I was? What were people going to say? There had never been a rally like this. And she said, but in having these conversations in my own head, she says, I just convinced myself to do it. And she did. And it was the largest ever pro-DACA, pro-Dreamer, pro-immigrants demonstration on the campus of Southern Utah University, where she brought it together. And it was a complete diverse public of people supporting this. And then she realized, holy shit, I got power. I shouldn't have sworn. I'm sorry. Sorry. Cut that out. Although she may have said that. Although probably not, because she was a student and she was, But the point is that it's that kind of a moment that I'm seeing. That's just one story of one student. I could tell you the multiple other campuses that I have visited over the past several months, and there are many of them. And they are, in fact, our new leaders. Like the Bolivian woman who we put on our show In the Thick, which I'm sure you're all going to subscribe to as soon as I'm done talking. And the Bolivian woman who was there to support her undocumented daughter, she too was undocumented, and she was talking about the anxiety that she was feeling around the Dreamer and the DACA issue because it is so friggin' confusing. And she said, I had so much anxiety. And then she said, but now that I'm here at the Capitol and I'm protesting and I'm talking to members of Congress, she said, I realized I am a tree. I am a tree. And that's how I see myself when I'm meeting with these members of Congress. I am a tree. And so these Latina leaders are teaching us how to see ourselves as trees. And in fact, they're right here in this room. I mean, I could start, all of you could just be like her. But in particular, yes, Marie, yes. Raise your hand. She's going to hate this. That is Marie Gonzalez Deal. If you listen to Latino USA right now, you will hear her story. Marie, hashtag We Are Marie, We Are All Marie, is one of the original dreamers. She is one of those original, young, undocumented people who stepped up and said, I'm undocumented and I'm unafraid. She is a part of our history. But she's not from New Mexico. She's from Costa Rica via Missouri. But she's here. She is here. So like the presence that you have been here for hundreds of years, there are new Mexicans like Marie in your midst. And so we do go back to our core. We push harder. We listen to our gut. We are forced to speak for those who can't speak for themselves. And we have to speak out because what is happening today is not normal. I mean, literally today. And it's actually not funny. It's terrifying. It is terrifying that a couple of weeks ago I woke up and I said to myself, oh my God, thank God I became an American citizen. What? Because today, by law, we understand now that if you have a green card or permanent refugee status, that you can be held. Unlike a U.S. citizen, you can be held. And so the ways, the extremes to which due process can be denied to people are being tested on the backs of people whose only original sin is that we weren't born in this country. Those people, like Marie, who, by the way, is married with kids and is documented and fine, but Marie had to live it in carne propia, right? She had to live it in her skin. But what about the rest of us? How are we living with the fact that this is happening on a daily basis, that we are watching people be targeted now for how we look or how we speak? What we're living through is not normal. And we're going to have to work harder. Yeah, I know we all are like, getting older, like to retire, like, nada que ver. Self-healing, self-love, the time for meditation, to go boxing, but we have to work harder than ever. Because what's happening now is not normal. So my job, yes, is to create dialogue, to dialogue with everyone, everywhere, to talk about it, to report about it, to punch it out, then dialogue some more. But the women of New Mexico, you knew what to do from the beginning because you've been doing it for longer than the rest of us right here on these ancestral lands. Because, in fact, all of you were here first and you stayed. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting me and for being the amazing people and women that you are. I love you so much, and I take you all with my heart. Muchas gracias. Thank you. Thank you.